We have breaking news. The Supreme Court has lifted a temporary nationwide injunction that had blocked the Trump administration from banning transgender people from serving in the military. The nation's highest court ruled along party lines 6-3 to reinstate the ban while the litigation continues in lower court. This was one of the first actions taken by the president following the start of his second term. A district court judge blocked the policy, calling it, quote, de facto blanket prohibition on transgender service. The court's 3 liberal judges said they would have kept the policy on hold. CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins us now. She's a professor at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Jessica, break down this decision for us. What more do we know?
I think you were very clear in the sense of this is about the Supreme Court saying that injunction can be lifted, meaning the ban can be implemented for now. This is not the Supreme Court having heard robust oral arguments, having received briefing. The Supreme Court is not ruling on, in brief, the merits. The Supreme Court is just ruling on whether or not the ban on the ban, meaning the injunction, could stay in place while this case plays out. And the court here, 6-3, apparently along ideological lines, is saying that that ban can be implemented while the case continues to play out. We should also note that there's another case in D.C. where a district court judge implemented a preliminary injunction. The appellate court in that case, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, is hearing arguments about whether or not that should become a permanent injunction. So I just want people to know this isn't the final word on this particular executive order.
And so you mentioned as this plays out in the lower court, what does that look like?
So it looks like hearing arguments on the substance of whether or not it, for instance, violates the Constitution to say that transgender people cannot openly serve in the military. Those who are critical of this executive action have said that that amounts to discrimination that violates the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause. Others, like the Trump administration, have argued that transgender members of the military create threats in the military, that they could undermine the ability of the military to do its job, and that judges owe the executive branch deference when it comes to military decisions.
So there are more than 1.2 million active duty members of the military, according to the Defense Department. A defense official said as of December 9th, there were about 4,200 troops diagnosed with gender dysphoria. The president, Jessica, banned transgender people from serving in the military during his first term. The Supreme Court allowed that to take effect in 2019. The Biden administration reversed that policy. Should we take anything from that precedent from the high court, knowing this is still being litigated?
So yes and no, in the sense that my understanding is that this ban is broader and more extensive than the ban during the first Trump administration. So it certainly gives us some indication about the court's thinking. Certainly the fact that the court allowed the ban to go into effect by lifting this nationwide injunction gives us some indication of the court's thinking. But it's a very different question as to whether or not an injunction can be lifted versus ruling on the merits. So do we have tea leaves? We do. Do we have a final answer? We don't.
And so you and I have been talking at great length about the difference between the role of Congress and executive action here. How does that issue play into something like this as significant as a ban on who can serve in our military?
That's a great question. And you and I have talked, I think, just a few hours ago about when the president needs to work with Congress, when the president can act alone. And I would say when it comes to military affairs, obviously the president is the commander in chief. And when it comes to who can serve in the military, I would offer that the executive branch does get broader latitude. This is not a situation, and I think your question is a good one, about this is not a situation where the Constitution says you must work with Congress because we're talking about appropriations. Having said that, this is absolutely a situation where you could see legislation, and legislation typically stands on firmer grounds than an executive action.
Okay, Jessica Levinson, thank you so much. We appreciate you. Let's go to CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Charlie, busy day on your beat. What can you tell us?
About the Houthis? Is that what we're referring to?
This is about, I know, that's why I'm saying this is a busy day in your beat. We'll talk the Houthis in a second and that news that the president made in the Oval Office, but I do want to ask you about the Supreme Court saying that the ban essentially the hold on President Trump's ban on transgender troops serving in the military can be lifted while this plays out in the lower court. What kind of reverberations is that going to have at the Pentagon?
Well, you know, Secretary Hegseth has been arguing for some time. In fact, he was a sort of catalyst to stop transgender service members from serving. And that was sort of with immediate effect. And he sort of put it down on the branches of the military to put that into effect. And the Army was the first to do that, essentially giving transgender individuals an opportunity to stop doing what they were doing and serving. A number of people that I spoke to have done just that. And the argument here is that the transgender community represents such a minuscule fraction of U.S. service members across the board that it shouldn't have an impact on operations or military readiness going forward. So there has been a pushback on both sides of this. There, you know, when the executive order first came out, it was very specific about what kind of individuals might be able to bypass that, but it had to do with dysmorphia, and it got a little bit technical as far as how that was concerned. So, you know, this has been an ongoing back and forth. But as far as the defense secretary is concerned, and he does make the rules, and he will stick by them, he will be against transgender individuals serving, even as this is going on.
Okay, Charlie, stand by. We will revisit the other topic that is making news in your world in a few minutes. But right now, I do want to bring in CBS News' Jan Crawford to talk about this as well, our chief legal correspondent. Jan, we talked to Jessica a little bit more about this SCOTUS decision. Again, not on the merits of the case, but what else can you tell us?
Well, I mean, it's lifting this nationwide injunction and essentially allowing the ban to take effect while the litigation continues in the lower courts. Now, a federal judge in Washington state had blocked this ban and made it apply to everyone across the country, saying that it was a blanket prohibition on transgender service. The Justice Department went to the Supreme Court and asked the justices to set it aside, arguing basically that the ban was important because allowing people with gender dysphoria would, quote, and this is what they said in the court filing, undermine military effectiveness and lethality. And it said that it was indistinguishable, basically, from one that the justices had allowed to take effect in President Trump's first term. So they're saying they're just coming back and reversing policies of the Biden administration and going back to what they had done in the first term. So Jessica, of course, brilliant, always right. I mean, this is not a ruling on the merits, but I agree with her that you kind of can read the tea leaves. And as she said, and as Charlie suggested, the courts historically give the military in these kind of decisions great deference. They kind of stay out of some of this stuff. And so this is why I would expect that even if it does get back up to the court on the merits, that we may have a similar outcome.
And Jan, knowing that this is your world and you live and breathe this stuff, how many months do you think it will take before there is some kind of resolution?
It'll take a while. You know, it's got to go back now to the lower court judge, and then it'll go to the appeals court. So, I mean, it will take a while, and it could be anywhere. I mean, I think in the first term, it took a couple years before it finally reached its way to the Supreme Court. And even then, the court never did rule on the merits. They just allowed the ban to take effect while the litigation was continuing. So, you know, these are things that the presidents can do. As Jessica indicated, this is something that President Trump did on his first day in office when he reversed President Biden's executive order that allowed transgender people to serve in the military. So, and then he directed the Defense Secretary Hegseth to implement this new policy. So it tracks in some ways what they had done the first go round. And they are adamant that this is not a ban on all transgender people serving the military. They say it's only people who have gender dysphoria or who have undergone medical intervention to transition. They say that's a medical condition that would affect service just like other conditions like asthma or hypertension. But if you're transgender and you're not seeking to transition, you could still serve.
Can you give us any more detail about the point you were making, and that the High Court typically gives a lot of deference to the military, to the executive branch for the policies under which it wants to adhere to and administer? Yeah,
I mean, they've always said pretty consistently, and this is really kind of you see this regardless of ideology, although this case did split along ideological lines, that they are not going to second guess military decisions, national security decisions. That's why we also see the courts sometimes taking a hands-off approach on some of the immigration issues that we've seen. So it's something where national security, when it's a national security issue, the courts are reluctant to second guess executive authority or executive decisions.
Jan Crawford, thank you so much.
Thanks.